We are back with another FPL video talking about the price reveals that happened yesterday and one that just happened on Tuesday morning. There's going to be plenty more throughout the day before the release of FPL, which should be sometime this week. So let's talk about all the prices so far, about the clubs that maybe revealed them in packs, so 4 players all at once, and also some really interesting individual prices for some of the best options from the last campaign. And of course, we're going to have some hidden gems here and there. I'm going to try and uncover them for you in today's video. If you end up enjoying it, smash the like button, subscribe if you're new, share this video around with those that love FPL and UCL fantasy, because both of those fantasy formats will be covered this season just as they were in the last campaign. So let's get straight into this, starting with Burnley and working our way all the way to the best players like Erling Haaland. We start off with Burnley here today, which might not seem the most interesting, and I'll be completely honest, none of these 4 players jump out as really good FPL options. I think the most exciting player out of all of these is Sorare, who got 6 goals and 6 assists in 27 appearances in a bit of a breakout season for him. Josh Brownhill used to be 4.5 million as a midfielder in FPL when he used to be in the Premier League, but he got 7 goals and 8 assists last season in the Championship, but in 41 starts. But he could be a decent option at 5 million if you're looking for that budget enabler. But ideally, you would want to find that kind of 4.5 million hidden gem like an Andres Pereira in the last campaign, which was maybe a bit too obvious. I don't see any so far that kind of stand out in the way the Brazilian did. But Brownhill could be decent at 5 million. Muric, the former Manchester City goalkeeper, could be one to look at. But when you've got Pickford and Leno at a similar price, you probably would opt there instead. And if Ramsdale turns out to be 5 million, then I think he could be the standout goalkeeper, as we've been discussing in the preliminary draft using FPL.team. And then we've got Roberts, who also was 4.5 million the last time he was in the Premier League, and he got a couple of assists here and there, but he's not really someone I'm that enticed by. So out of these 4 players, I think Sorare is the most exciting. Brownhill and Roberts could be ones to look at if you're looking for budget midfielders and defenders. But with Burnley at the moment, it's probably kind of a steer clear and then wait and see what the rest of the players are priced at. On Tuesday morning, we got the prices for these 4 Chelsea players. Raheem Sterling is coming in at 7 million. And remember, towards the end of his Manchester City career, he was priced at 10 million and above. And at one point, I think he was as high as 11 million in his FPL career. Now, I think that's a pretty decent price. He was very underwhelming in the last campaign, but he definitely could thrive under Mauricio Pochettino. You've also got Mudryk, who is playing in the under-21 Euro tournament. He's doing a very good job. Ukraine have reached the semi-finals after beating France 3-1. Mudryk got an assist there, played extremely well, and we know his quality. He's a bit of a raw talent. That's why Arsenal and Chelsea went in for him, and he obviously went for such a high fee. And I think at 6.5 million, these 2 wingers could be extremely viable options into the next season, and that's kind of a good thing about Chelsea doing so poorly in the last campaign, because a lot of their players have the potential and they're going to be priced very low this season. Then we've got the dynamic duo of Reece James and Ben Chilwell. I have to say, really good prices for them. And with Reece James, there's always this potential. We know he can deliver an 18-point haul here and there, but the problem with him is he can't stay fit. He gets so many injuries, and you look at his points totals over the years, it's not that impressive, to be quite frank. But we know he can score goals, he can get assists, and if Chelsea can keep things together at the back, then Reece James could definitely be a prime option in the defence. But I would still be a bit cautious about him. Despite the price being very good, I still would urge caution and not just buy him in straight away, because he still is a bit of an unreliable asset. I think Chelsea will improve from last season. I don't see another 12th place finish on the cards. I think they could actually compete for the top 4, and there's going to be more clean sheets. And if Reece James can stay fit, I think he could be one of the very best defenders in the game. But unfortunately, I have to say, I still think he's going to get those injuries from time to time, and that's what could stop his momentum. And therefore, I'm not so sure if I'm going to start game week 1 with him. That's not to say I'm telling everyone not to go for him, but I would be cautious with his record. Even Ben Chilwell has picked up a fair few injuries over the years, but I'm actually a bit more confident in him staying fit than I am with Reece James. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. There will be some of you watching that disagree, and that's completely fair enough. But ultimately, these 5 Chelsea players that we've had so far, these 4 on screen and one we're talking about later, some very impressive prices for these players, and I think they're going to have a much better season this time round. Even the prices for Fulham seem interesting yet fair. Mitrovic comes in at 7.5 million after a decent return to the Premier League. Historically, he actually struggles in this competition, but let's not forget how well he started in the last campaign. He tailed off a little bit towards the end. He got that hefty suspension of around 8 games after his altercation with the referee against Man United, but even after he returned from his suspension, he was scoring goals and being a nuisance to the opposition defenders. So I think Mitrovic could be a decent punt there at 7.5 million. Andres Pereira, even at 5.5, I think offers tremendous value. Of course, if he was at 5 million or below, I think most of us would have him as our fifth midfielder. But at 5.5 million, that might be a bit too steep. And you could even go to Gibbs White, Jacob Ramsey, Eze, Mitoma, Solly March, etc., who all are around 6 to 6.5 million. Of course, March is yet to be confirmed, but I think Pereira still remains a decent option at that price. Then we've got Tete. I think he's the most interesting option here at 4.5 million. If you maybe are considering a fifth defender, that's a bit of a budget option from one of these lower clubs, so to speak. Fulham did very well in the last campaign. I think they will tail off a little bit this time round and drop a few places, but you'd still expect them to have a very good chance of staying up, maybe finishing mid-table. And then you've also got Ream at 4.5 million, who is also a decent option from time to time. So some very interesting prices here. I think the best value for money from these options is probably Andres Pereira and Tete, and I think Mitrovic is a solid yet dependable option. Of course, I say dependable, assuming he can stay suspension free. Liverpool released their prices yesterday, and Darwin Núñez comes in at a very good price at 7.5 million. I think it's fair. It also encourages people to maybe take a punt on him. He is a bit of an unreliable asset. He's young. He's got a lot of potential. He's a bit raw, similar to Mudryk, and I think Darwin Núñez could have a bit of a breakthrough season in the Premier League this time round. If he can start most games, I think he's going to score probably 15 plus goals. That's kind of my prediction for him, but it all depends on the amount of minutes and starts he gets. Can he stay injury free? Can he avoid suspensions like he got against Crystal Palace on his home debut? There's a lot of question marks, of course, but I think Darwin Núñez will deliver, and he's a very good option at 7.5 million potentially. We've got Andrew Robertson at 6.5 million. He had a bit of an underwhelming campaign, and even Trent Alexander-Arnold did, but towards the very end in the last 10 game weeks, he absolutely delivered, especially when he moved into that inverted right back role against Arsenal in game week 30, delivering I think 1 goal and 7 assists, an absolutely amazing total with plenty of bonus points along the way. Now, Liverpool need to shore up defensively for me to have Trent Alexander-Arnold set in my Game Week 1 team. And of course, a lot depends on their summer signings. They've already signed Szoboszlai and McAllister, so they have bolstered their midfield a little bit, but I still think they need a little bit more in that position, as well as in the defence. I know Joe Gomez, Konate, Van Dijk all look great on paper, but I still think they need another top defender, even potentially in one of the fullback slots for a little bit of squad depth as well. I still think Liverpool are 3 or 4 signings short from maybe majorly competing for the Premier League title, and of course that's all subjective, but I still think they are lacking a little bit more. Then we've got McAllister at 6 million. I think that's a very good price too. Arguably he should have been priced a little bit higher, but he won't be on penalties this time round. You would assume, of course, with Salah being at the helm. McAllister was the one on penalties at Brighton. I think he'll probably be second or third in command here. If Fabinho's still on the pitch, he's also a very good penalty taker as well, but I think McAllister is the most interesting of these 4 in terms of the prices and offers potentially the best value as well. But Trent Alexander-Arnold at 8 million remains a very good option, but I think if he was 7 or 7.5 million, he would 100% certainly be in my team. This time round at 8 million, I have a few doubts about him, especially if it means I can't go for Harry Kane up front or Salah in the midfield. And let's not forget, Liverpool don't have the best opening portion to the season with their fixtures. But let me know your thoughts on these prices. Which of these players from each of these clubs we're talking about are you most interested in? I think most of you will say Trent Alexander-Arnold, but I also look at Darwin Núñez and McAllister as potentially great South American options. A bit similar to Burnley, and it kind of is a historical thing with us. When we look at newly promoted clubs, you kind of look at their options and you're like, I'm not really too sure about them. They're unproven quantities in the Premier League, especially these 4 that you see on screen. I think the major standout here is Bell coming in at 4 million, but let's not forget that he's actually away in the Gold Cup for CONCACAF, and he won't be available potentially for the start of this season, because after he's done on the international duties, he probably will take an extended break and then come back later in the season. But once he is coming back into the squad, I think he could be a great option as a 4 million enabler, a defender who could get the odd clean sheet and I think Luton Town could actually be quite a surprise package. And most people will look at a newly promoted club and say, oh, they'll be strong at home, and away from home, that's where you'd expect them to lose. But actually, they were much more impressive on their travels in the Championship. The home record is actually quite average, you could argue. They didn't lose many games at home, but they drew a lot of them and didn't pick up enough points. They weren't in the top 5 in the home standings, but away from home, that's what was the difference maker that helped them get promoted to the Premier League. So I think Bell from these 4 players is the standout. Adebayo as well is probably the other one I'm mainly looking at. But any Luton Town fans, if you're watching this video, let me know your thoughts. Which player would you recommend to those that play FPL? It'd be very interesting to see. You definitely would know much more about Luton Town than I do. But like I said, for me, my personal favourite is Bell, but I don't think it'll be an option in Game Week 1. It's easy to forget how much Nottingham Forest spent last summer, and they barely survived in the Premier League. It took until Game Week 37 when they beat Arsenal 1-0 to secure their Premier League status, and their home record was very impressive. That was the difference maker, because on their travels, they were the worst Premier League club of them all, and I don't expect that to change so much this time round. Even if they make a lot of signings, it all depends on the quality of those signings, of course, and a lot remains to be seen in pre-season and, of course, when we kick off in Game Week 1. But some of the FPL prices are very interesting. I think Brennan Johnson at 6 million is a very good price, and it makes him an option. You can consider him over someone like Watkins, for example, 8 million, Kai Havertz if he turns out to be a forward, Gabriel Jesus, and all these that are going to be around 7-8 million, like Darwin Nunez as well. Then we've got Awani, who is also capable of scoring goals. He scored against Liverpool and Arsenal in home matches. I think he could also do the same this season away from home too. We've got Danilo, who's a very exciting player, coming in at 5.5 million. I think he could be the breakthrough star for Nottingham Forest. He already made an impact since January, but I think this time round he'll be much more consistent, and he's also another player that Arsenal are looking at. They seem to be linked to everyone these days, but Danilo is a very exciting talent. And then we've got Aurier, who's probably the least interesting from these 4 in my opinion. With Nottingham Forest, I'm mainly looking at their midfielders and forward. So Brennan Johnson, Awani and Danilo are probably their 3 best assets. And Aurier could be a decent one at 4.5 million. He will be their starting right back, but he also has had a few injury problems himself, and Nottingham Forest are very poor defensively, especially away from home. Another club have just revealed their prices. This time it's Newcastle. I'm not too interested in Bruno Guimaraes or Joelinton at 6 million in the midfield. But what I'm really looking at, apart from Isak at 7.5 million, which is a decent price for him as well, is Sven Botman. I think he's just a standout at that price. He's probably a bit too easy to include in our teams. Despite some poor fixtures to start the season for Newcastle, I think Botman at 4.5 million is a steal. We all thought he would be 5 million. All these price algorithms and predictions had him at 5 million. I think 4.5 million is a bit too cheap, but you know what? Let's not complain. Let's just include him in our team. I think that's kind of one of the most standout prices we've seen so far. Let me know what you think of the other prices as well, but that's really the one I'm looking at from the Newcastle ranks. As for Isak, I think the minutes are always going to be a bit of a concern with him. Callum Wilson as well, if he stays fit. That's going to just spell problems for Isak, who could play on the left-hand side or sometimes drop down to the bench. I think Isak will maybe get more minutes than Wilson over the course of the season, but that doesn't necessarily mean he'll get more FPL points, because if Wilson has the penalties, he's also got the bonus points as well in his favour, then Isak might not be as tempting as that 7.5 million price tag would suggest. There will be returns from Bruno Guimaraes and Joelinton, but I think the main ones to look at from Newcastle are Botman and Isak. With Sheffield United, I'm not too interested in these 4 players that have had their prices revealed. I think Berg at 5 million could be a decent one, but I'm not really too impressed, or, there's nothing that really stands out to me. If there was a 4 million defender, then maybe I'd be keeping an eye on that. And if they also make a really top signing in the midfield, they sign a young talent with a lot of potential. But really, I just don't see with Sheffield United. I could be wrong, of course, about this. And like I said, I think Berg at 5 million could be potentially the best option there as well. He got a few returns last season in the Championship, but his goals plus assist record isn't that great historically, and he's not someone I would definitely trust to get those returns. I think McBurney will obviously get the most goals there in the forward position, but at 5.5 million, I'm just not too sure about that. I'd probably rather spend an extra million or two and get a Nottingham Forest asset like Brennan Johnson or Awani, and you've also got a few more hidden gems potentially like Darwin Nunez at 7.5, so I'm not too keen on on these Sheffield United assets. Let me know if you think I'm wrong. Of course, it's all just an initial reaction. I think Berger is probably the best, but even then, he doesn't stand out too much to me. The final club we're going to discuss today is West Ham, and there will be more prices revealed throughout the day and probably when this video is released, but there's the final one that has been released during the recording. Jeroboam comes in at 7 million, so a 1 million price drop, 1.5 million actually, and I think that's quite fair, and it reflects upon the poor season he had in the Premier League, but he did end his overall season in the best possible way, scoring that winner in the dying embers of the game against Fiorentina in the UEFA Conference League final. So I think Jeroboam is actually a pretty good price point, and you've suddenly got so many options around 6 to 7 million, which we've discussed already, and it's all about nailing down those 4 or 5 midfielders in your starting 11. Mikel Antonio at 6 million, that's a pretty decent price, but I'll be honest, I'm still not going to consider him, I think, because his goal record isn't that impressive, and apart from that really good start he had a few years ago to the Premier League, he generally is a very inconsistent finisher and not someone that can be relied upon. Then we've got Benrahma at 6 million. I think he's actually a bit more enticing than Mikel Antonio. But any West Ham fan will tell you he's probably the most underutilized player and maybe the most harshly treated by David Moyes. Sometimes he's subbed off when he should be staying on the pitch, and it should be a few other players that are putting in worse performances that should be subbed off. But there you go. Benrahma is still a decent option. He's on penalties, and he could be a really good option there alongside Lucas Paqueta and Jeroboam at those respective price points. I think Jeroboam would be the standout. After that, it's between Lucas Paqueta and Benrahma for me, but it's not really too much to separate all three, to be fair, when you take price into account. And Agüerd comes in at 4.5 million. If West Ham can tighten up defensively, as they did towards the very end of the campaign, then I think Agüerd could be a really solid option and probably a pretty decent price point. But then again, we've got Sven Botman at 4.5 million, and he's definitely many levels above Agüerd and any West Ham defender. After a dream start to his Manchester City career, Erling Haaland has gone up from 11.5 to 14 million, and with 59 big chances, an XG of around 30, 36 goals in 35 games. Can you really argue against that? He's going to be probably the highest scoring player yet again this season if he can stay fit. He didn't really have these injury problems in the last campaign, but at Borussia Dortmund, especially towards the very end of his career in Germany, he was picking up a fair few injuries that kept him out for quite a few spells. These weren't really lengthy spells, but there was a lot of short injuries from time to time. So that's really going to be the main issue for Erling Haaland. He's got a fantastic start to the season in terms of fixtures. You would expect Manchester City to start like a house on fire, and I think Erling Haaland at 40 million is still worth that steep price. And he joins an exclusive club of Robin van Persie, Thierry Henry on 2 occasions, and Cristiano Ronaldo to be priced at 14 million. But you have to say it's thoroughly deserved. But you also might ask the question, why was Mohamed Salah never priced at 14 million, especially after his consistency, and he can also break another record? What record is that, you may be asking? Well, Mohamed Salah, if he can break the 200-point mark, he will become the first player to ever do it 7 times. He's currently joint top with Frank Lampard with 6, but if he can get over 200 points in this FPL season, that will be the first player to do it 7 times. And of course, at 12.5 million, I think that's a very good price. It's fair, and it also reflects what he did last season. A bit of a shaky start, but I think towards the very end, he started picking things up from where he left off. And yes, he might not have been as impressive as the previous campaign when Liverpool were chasing the quadruple, but Salah at 12.5 million is always going to be an enticing option. And really what it comes down to with your choice of structure is, apart from Erling Haaland / Harry Kane up front, do you go for Salah in the midfield? Do you also go for Trent at the back? You can also have 3 of those 4 I just mentioned, but that also means you're going to have a weaker squad in general, especially your bench, which could be severely lacking as a result. But Mohamed Salah is always worth the money, and despite some turbulent fixtures to start the season, I think Salah is still worth investment, but he's not my favourite premium option. I think that would be Erling Haaland and Harry Kane. Heung-min Son and Raheem Sterling have experienced the biggest price drops of any player so far in the price reveals issued yesterday and today. He was 12 million last season. Let's not forget, he was priced 0.5 million higher than Harry Kane, and he's gone down all the way to 9 million. He had a very poor season, but he was starting to pick up, I think, towards the very end. It wasn't great. It wasn't Heung-min Son at his absolute best, but he still was getting a few returns here and there, and I think he will do much better this time round. And under the new manager, I think Heung-min Son could be a great option at 9 million. I'm actually including him potentially in my team. It's a very serious consideration I'm having. The problem is, if you've also got Bukayo Saka at a similar price, and you've also got Martinelli, Odegaard, and a few others here and there like Bruno Fernandes, then it will be a bit tricky to fit in all of them at the same time. But I think Heung-min Son is definitely worth consideration. You don't need to go for him, especially if you go for Harry Kane already up front. But one very good differential, I think, to kickstart Game Week 1 is to have both Heung-min Son and Harry Kane, the dynamic duo of all these years in the Premier League. After a terrific campaign from Martin Odegaard, which saw him score 15 goals and end up being the second highest scoring midfielder in the game. I mean, what more can we say about Martin Odegaard? He is the captain of Arsenal, and there are always these kind of question marks about, oh, maybe we should go for Bukayo Saka because he's going to be more nailed. Martin Odegaard will not be benched. Let's just put it that way. Yes, of course, with the Champions League coming along, Arsenal will rotate a little bit more. And if Arsenal also make a few more signings in the midfield, then Odegaard could get the occasional rest. But I don't see that happening. He's the captain. He's Arsenal's best player, arguably. And he's going to play at least 80 plus minutes in every single game, in my opinion. So I don't really see that as an issue. And for bonus points, he's arguably the very best option Arsenal have to offer. And look, I'm not saying he's definitely a better option than Bukayo Saka, but if Saka comes in at 9.5 million and there's a 1 million price difference, then I'm probably going to opt for Odegaard instead. You'd also expect Martinelli to be around 8 to 8.5 million, so there's going to be a bit of an interest and also a bit of a clash between all these Arsenal assets, but currently I am favouring Odegaard and Martinelli as the two Arsenal midfielders to go for. Yes, out of those three I just mentioned, Martinelli will be the least nailed, so to speak, but he also has the most goal threat and he has a lot of potential. I think Martinelli will do even better this time round, and if I see any Arsenal player getting to the 20 goal mark, it will be him. So it's going to be an interesting one for sure, but I think Odegaard at 8.5 million is still a very good price. Although the price decrease might not be as dramatic as Raheem Sterling and Heung-min Son's was, a 1.5 million price decrease is still quite significant, and it makes Bruno Fernandes an enticing option. You would expect Marcus Rashford to be the most expensive Man United midfielder now, but that doesn't mean he is the best, and I think Bruno Fernandes could match, if not surpass Marcus Rashford this season, yet be a cheaper option in the process. So I think Bruno Fernandes coming in at this price point is very, very impressive, and maybe it does reduce the differential element of it. I think he might be a bit higher owned than he was at the beginning of last season, but it's a good price. I think it's quite fair, and really the question comes down to sometimes, do you go for Bruno Fernandes or Martin Odegaard when they come in at the exact same price? Those are some of the conundrums we're going to have come Game Week 1, and I welcome them, and it does encourage a little bit of a difference in the template. Ollie Watkins has risen from 7.5 million to 8 million, and I think that's fair. Ever since December, Unai Emery has completely transformed Aston Villa. They are now one of the most exciting clubs in the Premier League, and Ollie Watkins was spearheading that attack. He still underperforms his XG, which was around 18. Yeah, he only scored 15 goals, but I say yet only, it's still a very impressive goal tally, and I think he can improve upon this next season, having Unai Emery as his manager from the get-go. And I've said this before in my videos, Unai Emery has a way of getting the absolute best from his strikers. You look at Aubameyang, Lacazette, also Carlos Bacca, and many others that he's managed throughout his career, and I think Ollie Watkins will be no difference. And one very recent example is Gerard Moreno from Villarreal. So I think 8 million is a good price. He is still one I'm looking to include potentially in Game Week 1, but it's not a standout price like we saw earlier with Sven Botman, who is just absolutely way too cheap for that price, and he's a must-have. So with Ollie Watkins, it's a fair, reasonable price, but it doesn't mean you have to go for him because you've got so many options around his price point in the forward position. This is arguably the best price we've had so far in terms of how underpriced Nkunku potentially is, and also in terms of how much value he may potentially offer us. He was the Bundesliga Golden Boot winner last season with 16 goals, which isn't really too much of an amount, to win the Golden Boot, but he only started 20 games, to be fair to him, and he got 4 assists, not to mention he had a good record in the Champions League before he was hit with multiple injuries throughout last season. But I think as a 7.5 million forward, Nkunku could take the cake, and he might be a very template and popular option alongside an Erling Haaland / Harry Kane. And if so many players weren't so expensive, it'd actually be quite feasible to have both of those two premiums alongside Nkuku as a tremendous front three. I'm not so sure if it's worth it considering the direction FPL has gone this season, but Nkuku might be the standout option for Chelsea. And, you know, I'm saying this with Mudryk being 6.5 million, Sterling being 7, and you've got the two wing backs being priced at 5.5 million. So Chelsea suddenly have a lot of potentially great and interesting options in FPL, because last season, apart from Kepa Arrizabalaga, the rest were terrible. Kieran Trippier was a bonus points machine, and the way he was going until Game Week 24, it just seemed almost certain that he would break the bonus points record set by Cesc Fabregas. He didn't quite reach it in the end, but Trippier as a defender, scoring that many points was impressive in upon itself. It might not have ended in the best possible way. Newcastle weren't keeping many clean sheets towards the tail end of last season, and Trippier's goal contribution certainly dried up, but making 110 key passes, having an expected assist figure of around 12, creating so many big chances in the process. I think Kieran Trippier is still worth considering, but when you've got Sven Botman at 2 million cheaper, I think that's where most people will go, especially when you see Man City and Liverpool on the horizon for Newcastle to start this season. So Kieran Trippier is definitely worth consideration, but he's not even the best amongst the Newcastle defenders, in my opinion. Just like with Kieran Trippier, Mitoma didn't have a great end to the campaign, but he still had some top performances sprinkled in between. So you look at the one against Arsenal, yes, he blanked, but he also gave Ben White a torrid time, and he was instrumental to Brighton's 3-0 victory. And for Mitoma to be 6.5 million, it could be a little bit too cheap. We all thought he'd be 7 million at the very least, so he could be a very template pick come Game Week 1. I would not be surprised if his ownership was around 40 to 50% even. That's how convinced I am that Mitoma will be a very popular option come Game Week 1. So let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. If Solly March comes in at 6 million, will you go for him instead of Mitoma, or will you just stick with the Japanese international? There's definitely going to be some very interesting prices yet to be revealed, but Mitoma looks like a very good bargain. Eze scored more points than Mitoma and was one of the highest scoring midfielders last season with 159 points, and I think he's the best Crystal Palace option that the Eagles have to offer. Yes, you've also got Elise, but I think Eze is a cut above, and he is the one I'm mainly looking at if I were to get or invest in any Crystal Palace asset whatsoever. He's an exciting player, he's got plenty of bonus points potential, he's got the assist threat, and he can score the occasional goal. So Eze is one I've definitely got my eye on, and he's actually featured in some of the drafts I've made using FPL.team since I made that video. Be sure to check out the preliminary draft I've made. There's also going to be more draft videos to come on this channel once all the prices are revealed and the game has officially launched. But Eze is definitely one to keep an eye on. I think he could be very, very good, and it wouldn't even surprise me for him to get double digits in either goals or assists. Another interesting price reveal yesterday was Mbeumo, but not necessarily for the price. We all thought he'd be 6.5 million, but it's because of the position. And to be honest, I would have rather he been a forward, because at 6.5 million, I think he would have been maybe a bit too template, to be fair. So him being a midfielder does cancel that out. It depends what kind of way you look at it, but ultimately I don't think Mbeumo will be very popular at 6.5 million as a midfielder. I could be wrong, but I think with Mitoma being the same price, you've got Eze, and not to mention all these other options like McAllister, I just don't think Mbeumo will be the most popular option, so to speak. It will be a mega differential, which could be, you know, a blessing in disguise, to be fair, especially with Tony being ruled out until January with that hefty suspension as well. Mbeumo, Wissa will be two Brentford options to keep an eye on for sure, and let's see if Brentford sign a forward in the summer. If they don't, Mbeumo could be playing as the lone striker whilst being a midfielder, so an out-of-position midfielder could be very enticing, and if that's the case, then yes, I think Mbeumo will definitely be one I will talk about a lot more in the weeks to come. But for now, it's just kind of a hesitant hold and wait and see what the situation at Brentford is. Morgan Gibbs-White registered 3 goals and 3 assists in his final 7 matches of the last Premier League season, and he's carried that form over to the under-21 Euros, where he's registered 3 assists in just 3 games. So he is a bit of a creative force. He also is on penalties from time to time for Nottingham Forest, and being priced at 6 million, I think he could be a very enticing option as well. And I think a lot of these prices, whilst they might seem a bit too cheap, you've got so many options around these price points that it does make you prioritize certain players, and you can't fit all of them in, especially in the midfield. So it's going to be very tricky to kind of decipher and also nail down those 5 midfielders potentially, or 4 depending on your team structure, whether you go for Gibbs-White, Mitoma, Eze, do you go for 2 Arsenal midfielders, do you go for Heung-min Son? It's going to be very interesting to see how we all just structure our teams in general, and do we go for a premium midfielder, or do we go for more of a balanced midfield with even a bit of squad depth on the bench as well? I have considered Gibbs White as my 4th/5th midfielder, and it's something I've definitely kept my eye on. I'm not too keen on most of the forwards at those price points, so Gibbs White is certainly one to consider. And apart from Brennan Johnson and Awani, Gibbs White could arguably be the very best option that Nottingham Forest have to offer. It's kind of close, I think, between those three. And if I had to pick, maybe Gibbs White at just $500,000 cheaper than Awani is definitely the one to go for. Lucas Paqueta has been in quite good form in terms of goals and assists for both club and country. So he got an assist in Game Week 37 against Leeds United, as well as the Conference League final against Fiorentina, which ended up resulting in a historic victory for West Ham, their first trophy in 43 years. And he also carried that form over to Brazil, where he's got a goal and an assist in each of his games for the international break, despite losing to Senegal 4-2 as well. But I think Lucas Paqueta could be a decent option here, and he will break the 100-point mark, which he failed to do in the last campaign, where he just was a bit off with 98 points there in the process. But he's not my favourite option in general, and when you look at Morgan Gibbs-White and all these other midfielders we've talked about already in the price reveals today, I think those are probably more enticing ones. But Paqueta is definitely one to keep an eye on. He's going to be a bit of a differential, and he's probably West Ham's standout option in the midfield. Carlton Morris comes in at 5.5 million, and he is Luton Town's talisman. Bell might be the most popular option overall, and that's completely understandable. You've also got Adebayo at 5 million, but Morris at 5.5 million offers better value than Adebayo at the same position at just $500,000 more. He scored 20 times and also assisted 7 in 41 starts in the Championship. He was the first one to step up in the playoff penalty shootout final, so I think Morris could be a very good option here at 5.5, but he is unproven in the Premier League. He's never played here before, and he also has just come off from the Championship. Let's see what business Luton Town do as well. So there's going to be a lot of question marks, but he could potentially be a bargain at 5.5 million, and apart from Bell, he is Luton Town's standout FPL option. We mentioned Sorare and how much of an exciting option he can be earlier in today's video, but I think Benson is probably a cut above him as well. So he is priced at 5.5 million, but he scored 11 times and notched 3 assists in just 14 starts, and he also scored in each of his last 4 games in the Championship last season. So I think Benson is probably Burnley's best asset on paper. He is the most exciting talent, but I also would urge a bit of caution because just like with Carlton Morris, he is an unproven entity in the Premier League, but that's not to say he can't do it. He has the potential, and he could be one of the reasons why Burnley stay up. Despite the iconic name, Kluivert has stagnated a little bit in his career. He only started 15 times for Valencia last season. He scored 6 times, won a penalty, had a decent expected assist figure considering the amount of starts he had, but he hasn't really been able to push on in his career, and maybe Bournemouth and a move to the Premier League could be that catalyst for him to rekindle the talent that he obviously possesses. At 5 million, I'm not really going to consider him too much, to be honest, but it's an interesting price. At least he's not at 5.5 or 6 million, where there's probably too much competition around those price points, for you to really consider Kluivert. But being a bit cheaper than most, I think he could be one to at least have in your consideration and in your shortlist for your 4th/5th midfielder. But really, if I was ever to go for Kluivert, it would be as a 5th midfielder and a rotational option coming off the bench. But Bournemouth have a talent on their hands. Let's see if they can make the most of it. I still don't know why Gary O'Neill was sacked though. Ndiaye had a decent Championship season in terms of the numbers, with 14 goals and 10 assists in 43 starts, and he has Premier League experience. I think he can get between 10 to 15 goal contributions, but just like with the other Sheffield United options I discussed earlier, I'm not that interested because at a similar price point, you're looking at Mitoma at 6.5 million or even Andres Pereira at the same price in the midfield. I'd rather go in that direction. You've got Gibbs-White at 6 million, and in the forward position at just a little bit more, you can go for more proven entities who play in better teams. Of course, Sheffield United can surprise people. They had a very good Premier League season around 3 years ago when they finished 9th, and Sheffield United can surprise people once again despite a lack of quality on paper. But it's all about the team, it's about the coaching as well, and let's see how Ndiaye does on his return in the Premier League. Despite Wolves having the 3rd worst away record and conceding 58 goals overall, Jose Sarr ended up being the 5th highest scoring goalkeeper in FPL, and he's got the saves and bonus points in his favour. but I think Wolves will continue to leak in goals. You saw in game week 38 they conceded 5 to Arsenal. Against Brighton as well, towards the end of the season, they conceded 6. I know they were relatively safe back then as well, but you still fear that away from home, Wolves can get absolutely battered, and that just reduces the appeal of Jose Sarr. If you've got the likes of Aaron Ramsdale and Nick Pope priced at 5 million or even 5.5, I'd rather go in that direction. But you have to say, even compared to Aaron Ramsdale, Jose Sarr scored more points, so that's definitely something as well to consider. But I don't think that'll be the case this time round, especially if Arsenal can also fix their defensive issues at the Emirates. So with Jose Sarr, he's probably Wolves' best option, but that doesn't mean he's a good option overall. Leno comes in at 4.5 million. He only scored 6 points fewer than Jose Sarr, yet comes in at $500,000 cheaper. So for me anyway, I think that's better value for money. And with Fulham, it's kind of difficult to tell. They'll probably be at a similar level to Wolves, but you'd probably give Fulham the edge a little bit, especially based on what happened in the last campaign. But things can dramatically change from one season to the next. Just look at Chelsea and look at many examples in the past. And I don't think there's much to separate Leno and Jose Sarr anyway. So for there to be a $500,000 price difference, I think that's quite significant for a goalkeeper. And you've also got a few other options like Tete and Ream to cover Fulham's defence, but I would argue that Leno is a cut above those two to cover Fulham defensively. Jordan Pickford made 124 saves, which is only behind David Raya and Bernd Leno, but he only kept 8 clean sheets, and Everton barely survived. It took until game week 38 and a famous victory to stay in the Premier League and be one of 2 clubs to have never been relegated from the English top flight. But with Jordan Pickford, I'm sorry, even at 4.5 million, which is obviously a bit more enticing and appealing than 5 million, I'm just not interested. And until I see a dramatic improvement in Everton defensively, I'm going to stay clear. I know Sean Dyche is the manager and they can have some very industrious performances from time to time, but I just don't trust Jordan Pickford or any Everton asset, especially in the defence, until they can sort things out in the long term. So those are all the prices for the players and clubs so far. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Which players are you going to include in your drafts heading into game week 1? And which players are going to be absolutely locked in for your final FPL team once the game has launched? Thank you very much for watching this video. It's been a long one. If you enjoyed it or found it useful, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe if you're new. Let's try to get this video to over 300 likes. Let's keep on pushing towards 20,000 subscribers and beyond. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and check all the links in the description below for the Patreon, channel memberships, Discord server, and once FPL launches, the FPL League will also be in the description as well. I wish you all the best of luck for the upcoming FPL season. Enjoy the summer break, and I'll see you next time.